I never imagined one anonymous message could change my life forever. When I agreed to meet the stranger at the park, I expected someone random, maybe a guy my age, maybe even a prank. But when I saw him standing there, I froze. It wasn't a stranger at all, it was him. My best friend's dad. He smiled like this was completely normal, but my heart was racing. How did I get here? It started on a completely ordinary day. I wasn't looking for anything, just scrolling through my phone after a long shift at work. My evenings were usually uneventful, filled with binge-watching shows or catching up on social media. Dating wasn't even on my radar. Then out of nowhere, I received a mysterious message. "Meet me at the park," it said. No introduction, no name. Just a location and an invitation. At first, I thought it was a mistake, or maybe a prank. But as the minutes ticked by, curiosity started gnawing at me. I didn't know why, but I wanted to go. I told myself it was harmless, just a chance to break out of my boring routine. So I replied, "Okay," and made my way to the park. I arrived early, my nerves getting the best of me as I paced by the fountain. The park was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, and I kept glancing around, wondering who I was about to meet. Was this a setup? A joke? Just as I was about to give up and leave, I saw someone walking toward me. My heart stopped. It wasn't a stranger. It was Mr. Anderson, my best friend Kara's dad. He had always been this calm, kind figure in my life, someone I admired for his patience and wisdom. He was the dad who volunteered at school events and always offered to help with homework when I stayed over at Kara's house. But seeing him here in this context felt surreal, like the world had tilted on its axis. "Hey," he said, smiling like this was the most normal thing in the world. I couldn't even respond. My mind was racing with questions. Why was he here? Why had he contacted me? What did he want? And most importantly, what was I doing here? I forced a polite smile, but inside everything felt wrong. The man I had looked up to for years wasn't supposed to be here, looking at me like that. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever this was, it was about to change everything. The days after that meeting at the park were a whirlwind of confusion and emotions I didn't know how to process. Seeing Mr. Anderson there in such an unexpected way had flipped my world upside down. He wasn't just Kara's dad anymore. He was someone who had sought me out, someone who clearly had something more to say. I tried to go back to normal, pretending nothing had happened, but it was impossible. Every time I saw Kara at school, or during our usual coffee hangouts, guilt gnawed at me. I kept wondering if she knew. Could she tell something was off? Did Mr. Anderson say anything to her? But then late one night my phone buzzed. His name lit up the screen, Mr. Anderson. "Can we meet again? Same place." My heart sank. Why was he doing this? Why me? I stared at the message for what felt like hours before I typed back a simple, "Okay." I didn't know why I said yes. Maybe I thought I'd get answers, or maybe I was just too curious to walk away. The next evening, I found myself back at the park. I told myself this was the last time, that I just needed closure. He was already there, sitting on a bench near the fountain. He looked calm, composed, but when he saw me, his expression softened in a way that made my stomach twist. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down next to him. "I'm not sure why I'm here," I admitted, crossing my arms defensively. "I don't understand what you want." "I just wanted to talk," he said gently. "To explain." His voice was steady, but there was a vulnerability in his eyes that threw me off. He wasn't the confident, wise dad I'd grown up knowing. He looked unsure. Nervous, even. "I've been thinking about this for a long time," he began, his hands clasped tightly together. "About you. About us. Us." The word felt foreign wrong. "There is no us, Mr. Anderson. You're my best friend's dad." "I know," he said quickly, his tone almost pleading. "I know how this sounds. But I can't ignore how I feel." "How you feel?" My voice cracked, a mix of disbelief and confusion. "What are you talking about?" He looked away, exhaling deeply. "I don't expect you to understand, but I've watched you grow into this incredible woman. You're smart, kind, and I don't know when it happened, but I started seeing you differently." His words sent a chill through me. This was the man who had been like a second father to me, who had taught me how to parallel park and cheered me on at soccer games. And now he was saying this? "This is insane," I said, shaking my head. It's wrong. Completely wrong." "I know it's complicated," he said, his voice soft. "But I couldn't keep pretending. I needed you to know how I feel." I stood up, putting distance between us. "Mr. Anderson, this isn't right. Kara would never forgive me. And what about your wife? She and I. Things haven't been the same for a long time, he said, standing too, his voice heavy with regret. But this isn't about her. It's about us. There is no us, I said firmly, my heart pounding. I don't even know what I'm doing here. He stepped closer, his eyes searching mine. You came because you feel it too, don't you? I opened my mouth to argue, to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Because part of me, one I hated to admit even existed, knew he was right. I can't do this, I said finally, stepping back. I have to go. I walked away quickly, my chest tight, and my thoughts a chaotic mess. His words echoed in my mind. You feel it too. But no matter how true that might have been, it didn't make it right. For days, I tried to push the whole thing out of my mind. I told myself it was over, that whatever Mr. Anderson thought was between us didn't exist. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop replaying that moment in the park. The way he looked at me, the honesty in his voice, it was impossible to ignore. It didn't help that he kept reaching out. His messages were short and careful, never crossing any obvious lines, but the subtext was always there. Are you okay? I'd like to talk again if you're ready. I just want to make sure you're all right. I ignored most of them at first, but the more I tried to bury my feelings, the harder it became to function. It was like he'd planted a seed in my mind, and it was growing no matter how much I wanted to uproot it. Finally, after yet another sleepless night, I gave in. Okay, I replied. One more time. Same place. That evening, I walked to the park feeling like I was walking to the edge of a cliff. I knew I should stop, turn around, and go home. But I didn't. He was already there when I arrived, standing by the fountain. He smiled when he saw me, but there was something tentative in his expression, like he wasn't sure if I was going to stay. I didn't think you'd come, he admitted, his voice soft. Neither did I replied, crossing my arms. But I need answers, and I need you to be honest with me. Always, he said, taking a small step closer. Why me? I asked, my voice trembling. Why now? You've known me for years, Mr. Anderson. Why would you even think this is okay? It's not about what's okay, he said, his tone earnest. It's about what's real. And this, whatever this is real for me. His words sent a shiver through me, and I hated how much they affected me. This can't happen, I said, shaking my head. Kara is my best friend. If she ever found out. She won't, he interrupted, his voice firm. I would never do anything to hurt her. Or you. But you already are. I shot back. This hurts. It's wrong. He stepped closer, his eyes locking onto mine. If it's so wrong, why are you here? I froze, his words hitting me harder than I expected. Why was I here? If I was so sure this was a mistake, why couldn't I stay away? I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He reached out, his hand brushing against mine. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but it sent a jolt through me that I couldn't ignore. I know you feel it too, he said softly. You don't have to say it, but I know. I pulled my hand away, but the warmth of his touch lingered. This is too much, I said, my voice trembling. I can't do this. We don't have to figure it all out right now, he said, his tone gentle but insistent. Let's just take it slow. No pressure, no expectations. Just see where it goes. His words were so tempting, so simple. But there was nothing simple about this. Still, a part of me, the part one tried to ignore, wanted to say yes. I don't know, I said finally, looking away. I need time. You can have all the time you need, he replied. I'm not going anywhere. The sincerity in his voice was almost too much to bear. I felt like I was being pulled in two directions, torn between what I knew was right and what I couldn't deny I wanted. We walked through the park for hours that night, talking about everything and nothing. The boundaries between us, once so clear, were now blurred beyond recognition. Every accidental touch, every shared glance, felt like it carried a weight we couldn't name. By the time we said goodbye, I was more confused than ever. As I walked home, his words echoed in my mind. I know you feel it too. And the truth was, I did. The next time we met, I knew everything would change. It wasn't like the other times where I could convince myself that I was only going to talk or that I could walk away whenever I wanted. No, this time was different. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, the sense that we had crossed a line and there was no going back. I arrived at the park just before sunset. He was already there, leaning against the fountain, his hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. I hesitated, standing in the shadows for a moment, wondering if I should turn around and leave. But when he looked up and saw me, the expression on his face, relief mixed with something deeper, rooted me to the spot. Hey, he said softly as I approached. His voice was warm, familiar, and far too comforting for what this situation was. Hi, I replied, my voice barely audible. We started walking, the silence between us heavy but not awkward. It was as if we both knew what was coming but were too afraid to say it out loud. The park was quiet, the only sounds the crunch of leaves underfoot and the distant hum of traffic. Finally, I broke the silence. I can't keep doing this, I said, my voice trembling. I can't keep pretending like everything is fine. He stopped walking and turned to face me. I don't want you to pretend, he said. I want you to be honest, with me and with yourself. His words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but I couldn't. Because deep down I knew he was right. I wasn't being honest, not with him, and certainly not with myself. I don't know what I'm doing, I admitted, my voice cracking. This feels so wrong, but I can't stop thinking about you. About us. He stepped closer, his eyes locked on mine. It's not wrong to feel something, he said gently. It's only wrong if we lie about it. Before I could respond, he reached out and took my hand. His touch was warm, steady, and far too reassuring for the storm raging inside me. You're incredible, you know that? He said, his voice so soft I almost didn't hear him. I've never met anyone like you. Stop, I said, pulling my hand away. You can't say things like that. Not when I'm your best friend's dad, he finished for me. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of frustration in his eyes. I know how this looks. I know what you're thinking. But this isn't some fleeting thing for me. This is real. Real doesn't make it right. I shot back, my emotions spilling over. What about Kara? What about your wife? What happens if they find out? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's complicated, he admitted. My marriage has been over for a long time, even if we're still living under the same roof. And Kara, she's my daughter. I'll always love her. But that doesn't change how I feel about you. I looked away, my chest tightening. You don't understand. If she ever found out, it would destroy her. It would destroy everything. She doesn't have to find out, he said quickly. We can be careful. We can take it slow. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I don't want to lose you. His words broke something inside me. I felt tears welling up, but I refused to let them fall. I don't know if I can do this, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. He reached out again, his hand brushing against mine. Just tell me one thing, he said, his voice filled with quiet intensity. Do you feel it too? Do you feel what I feel? I wanted to lie, to tell him no, to end this once and for all. But I couldn't. The truth was too heavy, too real, to deny. Yes, I whispered, the word hanging in the air like a confession. For a moment, everything stood still. Then, before I could process what was happening, he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't the kind of kiss you see in movies, perfect and rehearsed. It was messy, desperate, filled with all the emotions we had been holding back for weeks. And when we finally pulled apart, the reality of what we had just done hit me like a freight train. This is insane, I said, my voice shaking. Maybe, he replied, his forehead resting against mine. But it's real. And I don't regret it. I pulled away, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I need to go, I said, taking a step back. Wait, he said, his voice filled with urgency. Please don't walk away. I have to, I said, my chest tight with guilt and confusion. I need to think. He didn't try to stop me, but the look in his eyes as I walked away nearly broke me. It was a mix of longing and despair, and it stayed with me long after I left the park. That night, I lay in bed, replaying the kiss over and over in my mind. It was reckless, forbidden, and everything I had sworn I would avoid. But it was also undeniable. I didn't know what was going to happen next. All I knew was that my life had just become infinitely more complicated, and there was no going back. The aftermath of that kiss was unbearable. Every part of me was conflicted. I told myself it was just a mistake, a moment of weakness that would never happen again. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, I couldn't stop thinking about him, about us. Kara noticed immediately. You've been so weird lately, she said one afternoon as we grabbed coffee. Are you okay? Yeah, I replied quickly, forcing a smile. Just stressed with everything going on. She narrowed her eyes, unconvinced. You're not hiding anything from me, are you? The question felt like a punch to the gut. I shook my head, barely able to hold her gaze. Of course not, I lied. Every time I saw her, the guilt threatened to suffocate me. She trusted me completely, and I was betraying her in the worst possible way. I knew I had to stop whatever was happening with Mr. Anderson, but I didn't know how. He wasn't making it easy either. His texts kept coming, gentle but insistent. Can we talk? I miss you. I just want to see you. I ignored them at first, but the pull was always there. I felt like I was being torn in two, caught between what I knew was right and what I couldn't seem to let go of. One night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzed again. It was him. I know this is hard, but I can't stop thinking about you. Please meet me one last time. I just need to see you. I stared at the message for what felt like forever. I knew I shouldn't go. I knew it would only make things worse. But against my better judgment, I replied, okay. The next evening, I found myself back at the park. It was darker than usual, the streetlights casting long shadows across the ground. He was already there, waiting by the fountain. You came, he said softly as I approached. I shouldn't have, I replied, my voice trembling. We stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of everything hanging heavy between us. Finally, he spoke. I know this isn't easy for you, he said. It's not easy for me either. But I can't ignore how I feel. I've tried, but it's impossible. This is tearing me apart, I admitted, my voice cracking. I can't look Kara in the eye without feeling like a horrible person. And your wife, what about her? My marriage has been over for years, he said, his tone filled with resignation. We're just going through the motions. And Kara, I know this would hurt her, but I also know that what I feel for you is real. I can't pretend it's not. His words only made things harder. Part of me wanted to believe him, to let myself fall into whatever this was. But another part of me, the part that still had a shred of rationality, knew it couldn't work. This will destroy everything, I said, tears welling up in my eyes. I can't lose Kara. I can't lose myself. He reached out, his fingers brushing against mine. You're not going to lose yourself, he said gently. You're finding yourself. I see you. And I care about you in a way I never thought I could care about anyone. I pulled my hand away, shaking my head. Stop, I said, my voice breaking. You don't get to say things like that. Not when you know what this will cost. He looked at me, his eyes filled with pain. I'm sorry, he said softly. But I can't stop how I feel. And I don't think you can either. For a moment, I stood there frozen. He was right, I couldn't stop how I felt. But I also couldn't keep letting those feelings dictate my actions. I can't do this anymore, I said, finally stepping back. I can't keep lying to Kara, to myself. This has to end. Is that what you really want? He asked, his voice filled with quiet desperation. It doesn't matter what I want, I said, tears streaming down my face. It's about what's right. And this isn't right. He didn't try to stop me as I turned and walked away. But I could feel his eyes on me, the weight of his presence lingering long after I was gone. That night, I blocked his number. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but I knew it was the only way to move forward. Over the next few weeks, I focused on rebuilding my life. I threw myself into my friendships, my work, anything that would keep my mind off him. Kara and I grew closer again, and though the guilt of what I had done still lingered, I found comfort in the fact that I had chosen to protect her from the truth. Looking back, I realized that what I felt for Mr. Anderson was real, but it wasn't healthy. It was born out of vulnerability and loneliness, not love. And while it was painful to let go, I knew it was the right thing to do. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that save you. And though I'll always remember what we shared, I know now that walking away was the only choice I could make. In the weeks that followed, I began to piece my life back together. Cutting off contact with Mr. Anderson had been the right choice, even if it left a hollow ache in its wake. I told myself that time would heal it, that the guilt and confusion would eventually fade. Slowly it started to. Kara, oblivious to what had been happening beneath the surface, continued to be her usual vibrant self. We spent more time together, laughing over coffee and planning weekend trips, and with each moment, I felt a little more like myself. But the shadow of what had almost been lingered, and I knew it would be a long time before I could fully let it go. One day, as we sat on her couch watching a movie, she leaned over and asked, "Do you ever feel like life doesn't make sense? Like, everything you thought was solid just isn't anymore?" The question caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Did she know? Was this her way of hinting at something? But her expression was thoughtful, not accusing. "Yeah," I replied softly. "Sometimes things happen that shake you, that make you question everything. But I think those moments can teach us a lot about who we are." She nodded, her gaze distant. "I guess you're right. It's just hard to figure out what to do when everything feels complicated." I wanted to tell her everything, to apologize, to explain. But I couldn't. Not because I was afraid of losing her, though I was, but because it wouldn't help. Some truths are better left unsaid, especially when they can only cause pain. As I walked home that night, I realized that letting go of Mr. Anderson wasn't just about protecting Kara, it was about protecting myself. What we had shared, as intense and real as it felt, wasn't built on a foundation that could last. It was a fleeting moment, born out of loneliness and vulnerability, and it was never meant to be more than that. I had learned something important about myself through all of this. I had learned that feelings, no matter how strong, don't always justify actions. That sometimes the right thing to do is the hardest thing. And that love, or the illusion of it, can be as destructive as it is beautiful. As time went on, the ache in my chest began to dull. I stopped looking for his name on my phone, stopped wondering if I'd see him when I passed the park. The memories were still there, but they no longer had the power to control me. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in soft hues of orange and pink, I found myself walking through the park where it all began. The fountain glistened in the fading light, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. This chapter of my life was over, and while it had left its mark, it didn't define me. I was stronger now, more sure of who I was and what I wanted. Sometimes life throws us into situations we can't prepare for. And sometimes we make mistakes, big ones. But those mistakes don't have to define us. They can teach us, shape us, and push us toward something better. As I stood there, watching the water ripple in the fountain, I let out a deep breath. It was time to move on. This experience taught me that temptation, no matter how strong, isn't worth losing the people who matter most. Boundaries exist for a reason, and crossing them can leave scars that take a lifetime to heal. In the end, the right choice isn't always the easy one, but it's the one that lets you live with yourself. What would you have done in her position? Could you walk away from something so intense, even if it felt real? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear what you think. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that dive into the messiest, most complicated parts of life. Trust me, the next one will have you questioning everything. Stay tuned.